This is the introduction to the self-care hug exercise. It's a useful practice for when we want to remind ourselves of how to become aware of when we're feeling tensed in the body and tense or anxious in the mind, and it's one way of releasing that tension. The practice uses the concept of self-kindness or self-compassion as a sort of antidote to the inner self-critic and feelings of inner threat in general. So it can be a useful practice for when we feel generally under threat, tense, stressed, or perhaps harassed by our inner critic and so on. Having said that, it's also useful to note here that if we are aware of a physical external threat, it would be appropriate to deal with that first. This practice is for when we are physically safe, but we're perhaps feeling stressed or harassed, or our inner threat system has been kind of activated. So the exercise comes from the practice of mindful self-compassion or kindness, and it's helpful in a few ways. In one way, it acts as a reminder of how it feels to be tense, tight, or uncomfortable in the body. And then we go through what it feels like to release that tension, tightness, or discomfort and come gradually to notice feelings of well-being. In another way, it's also a helpful example, like a metaphor really, for what happens in our body and mind when we don't feel okay, or when our inner critic has become triggered. And it shows us how we can then, through noticing the feelings of well-being when we experience, as we release the tightness, we can then become familiar or reminded even of how it feels to notice those feelings of well-being as we learn to switch on or access our own inner caregiving system. So if you're new to this practice, it might be an idea to listen to the practice first to see whether you might like to try it out. And if you then choose to try the practice, it can also be a really nice idea to get used to doing it when you don't feel a specific need, so it comes easier each time you carry out the practice. And then when you find that you have a specific need and you want to try using the practice, you're already used to feeling it, using the practice, and you've kind of built up a little bit of a memory of how it works. If you're currently or thinking of working with a therapist, one option might be to practice this in session with your therapist if you choose. As the title of the practice suggests, it involves giving ourselves permission to give ourselves some caring touch. For example, bringing both hands together, and if we choose, bringing both hands to the centre of the chest. It's worth noting here that different physical gestures can evoke different emotional responses in different people. So before you listen to the guided exercise, perhaps experimenting with what physical gestures of comfort might work for you, so that you can find a manner of physical touch that you will feel is genuinely caring and supportive, and one that you are happy tolerating. So here are some examples, and then you may find your own suggestions as well. Placing one or two hands over your heart or the centre of your chest, or gently stroking your arm, cupping your hand over a fist and then placing that over your heart, maybe placing one hand on your cheek, cradling your face in your hands, or crossing your arms and giving yourself a gentle hug. As I said before, you might find other examples come to mind, and just choosing what works for you as a preparation for trying the guided exercise. And before we go, there's a term called backdraft. In this particular use, backdraft is referring to the experience of discomfort or pain, emotional, mental or physical uneasiness, which may sometimes arise when we or others offer ourselves kindness and compassion. It may look like feelings of shame, grief, fear, or sadness, or it may manifest as thoughts like, I'm a failure, I'm all alone, I'm unworthy, I'm not lovable, etc. Or it might also manifest as physical aches, pains, and felt senses in the body. So remembering that if you experience that discomfort, it's not caused by self-compassion itself, but it can sometimes arise when the warmth of kindness opens us up to a pain that we might previously have closed off from as a protective measure in order to help us survive and thrive. If we experience this backdraft or discomfort, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It can just mean that we're beginning to turn towards our inner experience. And it may be something that you might choose to work through with a therapist. So throughout this practice, if you should experience such discomfort or distress, it can be helpful to give yourself permission, if you wish, to come out of the practice. It may be that such practice is not appropriate for you right now, or you may decide to come back to it at a later date, or you may choose not to. But at all times, remembering that the choice is yours to make, you're in control. Similarly, throughout all of these practices that I offer, you may want to tune my voice out and then tune back into it when it feels right for you. Again, remembering that the choice is yours to make, and as always, you are in control.